Hi, I'm Finley.
And I'm Ryley.
And today we're going to be analyzing The Awakening by Kate Chopin using a historical lens. We came up with 6 steps to make it a little easier to analyze any literary work using a historical lens. The first step is to look at the time the book came out and the setting of the book.
And then we looked at the author of the book.
Next, we look at the different types of characters and the roles that they played in society.
And then we analyze how those different types of characters interacted, like how the different races and the different genders interacted.
The next step is to analyze the ending and how it comments on society and the time.
And then we looked at the book's reception, about how people viewed the book differently and how did it represent its time.
For our first step using The Awakening came out in 1899. It takes place in the Grand Ile and in New Orleans, which are two French Louisianian places in Louisiana. A lot of Kate Chopin's work was set there because that's where she lived.
Our next step is to look into and analyze the author. The author, Kate Chopin, was a very controversial figure known for her feminist literature. She struggled with the lack of acceptance of her writing, and she lost her husband about 15 years before ever writing The Awakening. He left her in a major amount of debt when he died. She struggled with depression about losing her own business over the debt and losing her husband and mother, which happened about 2 years before her husband died. Going through all this trouble as a woman in her time was especially hard, but she was able to make some money off the investments and her writing. Her experiences at the time, which likely led to her having a much different outlook than critics, and it helped her better understand the hopelessness of what the main character, Edna, was facing.
Next we have step 3, which is analyzing the different types of characters and their roles in society. In The Awakening, the main different types of characters we have are men and women, and there are stark contrasts between the male and female characters in this book, and the roles they're expected to play in society. All women were pretty much expected to be fantastic mothers, and while Edna kind of rejected this role and it wasn't something that she wanted in her life, Adele Ratignolle is seen embracing this role, and in that way she kind of serves as Edna's foil. Meanwhile, the men in the book, like Léonce Pontellier, for example, does the bare minimum for his kids and mainly just spends his time making money, but is still praised for everything he does for his family, as if it's that significant. And then Robert, as a young man, gets to travel wherever he wants and flirt with as many women as he wants, so there are no consequences, whereas if Edna or Adele were to take similar actions, they would be admonished.
Next, we were able to analyze how exactly the different types of characters interact with each other. In the story, women are seen as far more inferior to the men. Early in the book, Léonce even goes as far to refer to his wife Edna as being his property. And we're also able to see a clear distinction between the Creole culture and American culture. The Creoles tend to be more open with their sexuality and tend to show more physical affection to one another, while Americans are much more reserved and conservative. We were definitely able to see the contrast with Adele and Robert, who are Creoles, and Edna, who's an American.
Next we have step 5, which is analyzing the ending of the book and how it was received. The ending of The Awakening is actually what makes the book so controversial. Well, there are other parts that make it controversial, like the whole cheating on your husband thing. It was a little glorified, but the ending where she committed suicide is very controversial because people don't know whether it's the only way to really free herself from society or something that's kind of selfish. And during the time that it came out, it was definitely seen as more selfish. But as time has gone on, the debate arguing that the only way for her to be free was to kill herself has kind of gained more merit as people sort of start to understand the roles that women were forced into at that time.
Lastly, we were able to analyze the reception of the book and how people viewed it differently and what exactly it represented at its time. People said that what Kate Chopin wrote and how the book ended was way ahead of its time. When it was published, it was considered very controversial because of its provocative content with a woman cheating on her husband. And people were not used to media representing women expressing their own sexual needs and expressing opinions of disdain towards their husband or their children.
That was our analysis of The Awakening by Kate Chopin using a historical lens.
Hope you learned something.
Dig 'em.
Dig 'em.